Cats are smart, but have you ever seen one try to buy food? In a small town, a fish seller noticed a stray cat watching his customers every day. But then, something strange happened. The cat walked in, dropped a leaf on the counter, and waited for fish. It seemed like a simple trade, but what followed turned into an unbelievable story. The story begins with a man named Henry who ran a small fish shop in town. His father had been a well-known fish seller for years, and Henry had worked beside him since he was young. Now that his father was old, everyone in town recognized Henry as the man who carried on the family business. He had been selling fish for years, and most of his customers were familiar faces. Some had been buying from his family since he was a child. Henry loved his work, greeted everyone with a smile, and enjoyed the simple routine of his days. But then, something caught his attention. For the past few days, a small tabby cat had been sitting outside his shop's window. The cat watched every customer, its eyes following every movement. Sometimes it would step inside, but never caused any trouble. One day, a customer chased the cat away, yet it returned as if nothing had happened. It never tried to steal a fish, just watched. Henry, who had always loved animals, especially cats, saw no reason to chase him away. But then, something unusual happened, something Henry never expected. One morning, while he was busy with customers, the little cat walked into the shop, carrying something in his mouth. Henry barely noticed at first, thinking the cat was just wandering in as usual. But this time was different. The cat walked straight to the counter, carefully placed a small leaf on top, and sat down, looking at Henry as if he was waiting for something. Henry glanced at the leaf, then at the cat. At first it seemed silly, but then everything made sense. Could the cat really think he was buying fish? It sounded crazy, yet it wasn't. The cat had spent days watching customers hand over money and receive fish in return. To him, a leaf was just like the paper bills people used. Henry had two choices: ignore the cat's strange attempt at trade or play along. With a chuckle, he decided to go with the second option. He picked out a small piece of fish and placed it in front of the cat. The little creature eagerly grabbed it and ran off. Henry smiled, shaking his head. But deep down he wondered, would the cat come back? The next day the cat returned with another leaf, and just like before, Henry accepted the trade. He placed a piece of fish on the counter, and the cat took it, happy with the exchange. This became their daily routine. Every evening, Eliza would arrive with a leaf, and Henry would hand over a small piece of fish. Soon, even the customers and workers began looking forward to Eliza's visit. They put out fresh water for him, and even made a cozy spot for him to rest. But one evening, something felt wrong. Henry was closing up when he noticed Eliza's fish was still on ice, untouched. That had never happened before. Where was he? The cat never missed a day. A strange worry settled in Henry's chest. He had been working since morning, exhausted and ready to rest, but now all he could think about was Eliza. Something wasn't right. He couldn't just ignore it. He had to find him. He started searching around the shop, calling out softly. No sign of Eliza. His usual spot was empty. Henry checked the park across the street, hoping to see the little tabby cat curled up on a bench or hiding under a tree. But there was nothing. A sinking feeling settled in his chest. He got into his car and drove around, his eyes scanning the sidewalks, alleys, and doorsteps. Every few minutes, he slowed down, hoping to catch a glimpse of that familiar striped fur. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. At the side of the road, curled into a tight ball, lay a small, familiar figure. Henry slammed on the brakes, barely remembering to park before jumping out of the car. His heart pounded as he rushed to the spot. It was Eliza. His fur was matted with blood, and he wasn't moving. Henry dropped to his knees, panic gripping his chest. He reached out with shaky hands, afraid of what he might find. But then, weakly, Eliza lifted his head and looked at him. His usual bright eyes were now clouded with pain. He let out a faint meow, as if pleading for help. Henry didn't waste a second. He carefully scooped Eliza up and wrapped him in his jacket. His mind raced. Where could he take him? He grabbed his phone and searched for a vet. The closest one was in the next town over. He called, but the phone went straight to voicemail. His stomach dropped. This couldn't be happening. Desperate, he called his friend, explaining the situation in a rush. Within seconds, his friend sent him an emergency after-hours vet number. A small glimmer of hope flickered inside him. Henry dialed immediately. After a few rings, a tired voice answered. They were still open for emergencies. Without hesitation, he jumped into his car and sped off, gripping the wheel tightly. Every red light felt like torture. He kept glancing down at Eliza, whose breathing was slow and weak. Who could have done this? Eliza was a peaceful cat, never bothering anyone. But right now, finding out didn't matter. Getting him to the vet was all that mattered. When Henry finally reached the vet's office, he felt like he was going to collapse. He rushed inside, and the staff immediately took Eliza from his arms. "He's lost a lot of blood," one of them said. "His ribs are broken and one punctured a lung. We need to operate now." Henry nodded, unable to speak. He could only watch as they carried Eliza away, hoping he wasn't too late. The vet finally came out with an update. "We've done what we can," she said. "Now we wait. If he makes it through the night, he has a chance." Henry barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Eliza lying helplessly on the road. The thought of losing him was unbearable. As soon as the sun rose, he rushed back to the clinic. The vet led him to a small bed in the back. Eliza was hooked up to oxygen, his tiny body wrapped in bandages. He looked weak, but he was alive. That was all Henry needed to see. The days passed in uncertainty. Eliza wasn't out of danger yet, but he fought hard. Henry visited him every day, bringing small pieces of fish, carefully cut into tiny bites. At first, Eliza barely had the strength to eat. But one day, as Henry placed a piece of fish in front of him, he saw something he had been waiting for. Eliza's tail flicked ever so slightly. It was a small sign, but it gave Henry hope. As Eliza recovered, Henry couldn't shake the thought of what had happened to him. Who had hit him and left him to suffer? After talking to the vet, he learned that Eliza's injuries were most likely caused by a speeding car. Henry decided to find out who had done it. Since he knew almost everyone in town, he started checking different shops' CCTV footage. It took hours of searching, but he didn't give up. After 2 days of reviewing videos, he finally found it. A car speeding down the road the night Eliza was injured. The driver didn't even slow down after hitting him. With the footage as proof, Henry went straight to the police station and filed a complaint. The case quickly gained attention because many people in town knew about Eliza's story. The police took it seriously and tracked down the driver. It turned out to be a tourist who had come to town for vacation. One night, he and his friend had been speeding through the streets, treating the town like their personal racetrack. The police charged him with a heavy fine and revoked his license. Justice was served, but Henry's mind was still on Eliza. Then, the call he had been waiting for finally came. The vet said Eliza was well enough to leave the clinic. But there was a problem. Eliza had no home. The vet checked. He wasn't microchipped. Henry put up notices, hoping someone would claim him. Days passed, but no one came forward. The only option left was a shelter. When it was time to pick Eliza up, he didn't hesitate. He signed the adoption papers and took him home. He had already prepared a space just for him: a soft bed, a scratching post, a warm blanket, and fresh water. But the best part? He bought Eliza 2 special toys: a small squeaky fish and a soft leaf. Eliza had once traded leaves for fish, but now he had all the fish he could ever want. No payment required. And most importantly, he had a home where he was truly loved. Henry had started with a customer, but he ended up with family.